everyone and welcome back. In this video we'll be reading another chapter of Christopher Robin by Disney. Chapter 12. Christopher quickly made his way back to the tree and the green door that would bring him home. Bending down, he cringed as pain shot through his joints. His attack on the heffalump had been intense on his body, now older and less resilient, was letting him know that he had pushed it. Biting back a groan, he made his way through the door, emerging a moment later in the woods behind his family's country home. Out of habit, he looked down at his watch. It was still broken, but it didn't matter. He knew that if he was going to make the train and get back to the city, he had to rush. Picking up his pace, he hurried through the woods. The red balloon bobbed and weaved in the air behind him. Catching a flash of red, Christopher felt a fresh wave of guilt as he realized how quickly he had left Pooh and the others. A part of him longed to have stayed, enjoyed the freedom he had felt for the brief time. But stepping out of the woods and onto the lawn, he caught sight of the house. It was a visible reminder of his real-life responsibilities. Christopher held his breath as he crossed the lawn. The last thing he knew was to attract the attention of Evelyn or Madeline. They would have so many questions. But just as he reached the house, he caught sight of his old bike leaning against the siding. The balloon string pulled at his wrist. Glancing around to make sure he was still in the clear, he walked over and quickly tied the balloon to the handlebars of the bike. It would be a nice surprise for Madeline when she came outside. "Father!" Madeline's high-pitched shriek of happiness stopped Christopher just as he turned to go. Looking up, he saw his daughter's face peering down at him from her bedroom window. Foolishly, as though he would somehow become instantly invisible, Christopher ducked down, but Madeline could still see him. "Father?" she repeated, opening the window and peering down. "What are you doing?" Christopher looked up at Madeline and then back toward the road. He could make a run for it, pretend he didn't see her or hear her. He groaned. That was the stupidest thought he had ever had. Of course he couldn't just run away from his daughter. "Were you in the woods?" Madeline called down. "Yes, but," Christopher stammered, not sure what to say. It wasn't like he could just come out and explain that he went through a door to another part of the woods and had been playing with his childhood animal friends for the past day. That sounded crazy. Just then, Evelyn stepped outside. Seeing her husband, she cocked her head in confusion, and a flicker of hope flashed in her eyes. It dimmed as Christopher shrugged apologetically. "I'm terribly sorry," he said to both his wife and daughter, "but I have to go." "You can't stay?" Madeline's voice had grown smaller, and she was looking down at him now with sadness, not hope. The expression broke Christopher's heart, and he silently cursed himself for stopping to tie that balloon. If he had just kept going, he wouldn't be standing there now, trying to explain himself to his family. "No, darling," he said finally. "I have an 11 o'clock meeting I'm terribly late for." Madeline's face crumpled. Pushing back, she slid the window shut and disappeared from view. Beside him, he heard Evelyn sigh deeply. "Sorry," he apologized again. "I didn't mean for her to see me, but I need to be on the next train." Even as the words left his mouth, he knew his excuse sounded weak. To his family, it seemed as if he had come out suddenly only to turn around and leave. Evelyn stared back at him for a long silent moment. Her eyes were cold, and when she finally spoke, her voice was icy. "Well then, you better go," she said. "There's a good explanation for this," Christopher said. "I promise." "I'd love to hear it," Evelyn said, folding her arms waiting. Christopher looked back at her, tried to see if there was any pity behind the coldness in Evelyn's eyes. He did want to tell her. He wanted to tell her everything. He wanted to apologize, and he wanted her to understand that he wasn't trying to mess up. He wanted to tell her about his adventures in the 100-acre wood, and how he had defeated the heffalump and found Winnie the Pooh. When they had first started dating, and when they had first been married, he would have told her. He would have told her and known that she would have believed him and been enchanted. But as he continued to look in her eyes, he realized that he had pushed her too far away, that she was lost to him in a way that he couldn't quite grasp. And while he knew it was entirely his fault, the pain was still terrible. "I can't," he said softly. The silence that followed was deafening. Turning to go inside, Evelyn looked back over her shoulder. There was nothing left in her eyes but disappointment. It was worse than the look she had been giving him. "I was thinking that Madeline and I should stay here longer," she said. "The country's good for her, for us." Christopher felt the blood drain from his face. He thought back to the night at the house when he had stood with the suitcases, worrying that he had pushed too far. Maybe he had then, but it certainly seemed like he had now. And he couldn't really blame Evelyn. "Do you really think that's best?" Christopher wondered. "I do." "For how long?" he asked, not actually wanting to hear the answer. Evelyn shrugged. "I don't know, Christopher." Then she walked up the steps and opened the back door. Looking down at her watch, she sighed. "You're going to miss your train." Then without another word she entered the house, letting the door slam shut behind her. For one long moment Christopher stayed there, rooted to the spot. His breath hitched in his chest, and he felt as though he were drowning in quicksand. He had to go. He had to. It was the responsible thing to do. If he didn't make the meet, he would be fired, and the company would probably shut its doors. But if he did go, what was going to happen to his marriage, to his life? Taking one last look up at the window of his daughter's bedroom, Christopher let out a sad sigh. Then he turned and ran down the drive. As his feet pounded the ground, he couldn't help wondering, had he just ruined everything? Madeline stared at the bookshelf in front of her. In her hand she held one of the assigned summer reading textbooks. She had read it cover to cover and written the required report. In fact, she had read every one of her summer reading books and done all the reports. It was time to put the books away, but for some reason she found herself hesitating. She still couldn't believe her father had been there in the country and that he had just left. She didn't understand. Had she done something wrong? Had she said something wrong? Had she diligently done all her work because that was what her father had wanted? She had only gone on one bike ride so far. Why hadn't he stayed? She looked at the book in her hand. She liked books because books had answers. They made sense. Her father didn't make sense to her, not anymore at The sound of the stairs creaking startled Madeline, and she looked over her shoulder to see her mother walking up them with a glass of milk and a plate of cookies. Crossing the landing, she held out the treats. "I believe I am done with these for now," Madeline said, not taking one of the offered treats. "Good, you know these books like the back of your hand," Evelyn said, trying to sound cheerful. The look on her daughter's face was heartbreaking. She was a little girl. She was a little girl spending time in the country, but instead of being outside in the fresh air, she was inside studying. As Evelyn watched, Madeline carefully shelved the final book and then stepped back. "Darling," Evelyn said, "what would you like to do?" Madeline cocked her head. What would she like to do? She honestly didn't know. Now that she was done with her work, she didn't have anything she had to do. She sighed. What she really wanted to do was see her father, but he had gone back to the city, so that wasn't a possibility. She looked around the room, her eyes landing on a box of toys. "I'd like to play," she said with a determined nod. "You would?" Evelyn said, surprised. Hope flooded through her. Perhaps Christopher's belief hadn't devastated Madeline as much as she thought it had. Maybe she could allow herself to be a child for once and relax. But then Madeline went on, and the hope for such a result faded. "Yes," Madeline answered as though she were responding to a test question. "I shall play better and harder than any child has ever played." "It can also be fun," Evelyn said. Madeline shrugged. "Agreed. It shall also be fun." Evelyn sighed. There was so much of Christopher in Madeline. When she had been a baby, Evelyn thought that was sweet and would stare at her daughter's face for hours, laughing at the similar expressions that would flit across both her husband's and her daughter's faces. But now she realized it was no longer a good thing. If Evelyn didn't do something, her daughter was going to grow up too fast. "Go out and play," she said, trying to keep the sadness out of her voice. "We'll have tea later." Pleased to have directions to follow, Madeline turned and marched outside. Watching her go, Evelyn silently cursed Christopher. "You should be here to fix this," she thought. "You should be here to play with your daughter," but instead he had chosen work, again. Pooh felt funny. He couldn't quite put a paw on it, but ever since Christopher had left the 100-acre wood, Pooh had felt strange. Walking back to Piglet's house, he thought maybe he was just hungry. After all, he hadn't had honey in quite some time, and a bear needed honey to feel like himself. Reaching to Piglet's cupboards, he felt around for a lone jar of the sweet nectar, but his search came up empty. Turning to his friend, Pooh let a very un-Pooh-like sigh. I don't feel very much like Pooh today. Piglet walked over and gently took Pooh's paw in his. There, he said softly. I'll bring you tea and honey until you do. Pooh nodded. Tea and honey did sound nice. Maybe if he had enough of both, the funny feeling in his stomach would go away. He wished, though, that Christopher could have stayed and had some tea and honey with him. It had been nice to have his friend back. Pooh hadn't realized how strange the 100-acre wood had been without him around. But now that he was gone, the absence was pronounced. Already fog had begun to roll back in through the trees, and the sun seemed less bright. Hearing a commotion inside, Pooh turned just in time to see Tigger bouncing into Piglet's house, holding a large pot of honey. He had a huge smile on his face and was bounding around, even more than usual. Apparently the funny feeling Pooh had was not felt by all. Hello, friends, Tigger said. Just in time, Pooh said, grabbing the pot and lifting it to his face. But instead of getting a mouthful of honey, he got bonked in the nose by something. Pulling his head back, he saw that it was the big brown folder Christopher Robin had been carrying around with him. Tigger, why did you take these out of the case of important things? Pooh asked. Tigger shrugged. Just taking up space, he answered. Needed to get rid of this flippity-flat paper, make room for the real important stuff. What will happen to Christopher Robin without them? Piglet asked. His voice squeaked nervously, and he began to search for acorns. Pooh put a paw to his thinking spot. This wasn't good. He couldn't remember exactly what Christopher had said, probably due to the lack of honey clouding his thoughts. But he knew that Christopher needed those papers. He tapped his thinking spot harder and harder. Think, 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 he said to himself. What was going to happen to Christopher Robin? And then he let out a shout. He remembered. Christopher said that a woozle was going to eat him for breakfast. The others gasped. Grabbing the brown folder, Pooh walked toward the door. He had to get this stuff back to Christopher before he got eaten. Turning to the others, he signaled for them to follow. They needed to find Christopher before it was too late. Madeline had decided she was going to play tennis. In this case, she had replaced a tennis ball with a red balloon she had found tied to her bike. Tying it to the net on the tennis court behind the house, she whacked at the balloon with an old wooden racket she had found. Not good at doing anything, merely halfway, she was prepared to not just play tennis, but rather play tennis at Wimbledon. Lifting her arm up, she took on the role of announcer. Madeline Robin surveyed for the Wimbledon title, she called to her imaginary crowd. She brought down her arms, hitting the balloon down onto the court. And it's an ace! She's won! The crowd goes wild. To her surprise, real cheering erupted from a bush along the court's edge. She cocked her head to listen. Then, tiptoeing closer, she tried to see inside the bush, but it was overgrown and she couldn't see anything through the thick greenery. Hello, she called out. No one answered. Growing more curious, Madeline picked up a balloon and threw it into the bush. A moment later, the ball came flying back. Who's in there? Asked Madeline in a high-pitched voice. She knew she should never have agreed to go play. It was safer in the house. No invisible things threw balls at her or cheered when she pretended to hit a winning shot playing tennis. Suddenly, the leaves in the bush began to rustle. Then Madeline heard voices. It sounded a lot like, "Stop pushing," and "Ouch!" Then, before she could turn and run to find her mother, 3 creatures fell out of the bush onto the court. Madeline shook her head, unsure if she was seeing things. But even after she blinked and pinched herself several times, the creatures, a small pig, a striped tiger of sorts, and a bear, were still standing there. They looked very much like she would imagine stuffed animals would look if they were real, which they couldn't be. "Hello," said Piglet. "You must be Madeline," the bear said happily. In turn, Madeline did the only thing she thought reasonable in such a situation. She screamed. Stumbling backward, Madeline tripped over something. Turning, she saw that the something she had tripped over was a small blue donkey. "Sorry about that," the donkey said. Once more, Madeline screamed, only this time the donkey startled. They began to run around in a circle. He would have kept going had he not hit the net and fallen into a heap on the court. Holding up his paw, the bear came closer. "We're sorry," he said. "We didn't mean to interrupt your game." Madeline took several deep breaths, trying to calm herself, but she found it wasn't working, because this didn't make sense, and she liked things that made sense. You're talking," she finally said. "Me?" the bear asked, putting a paw to his chest. He shook his head. "No, I'm not talking. Well, I am now, I guess." Madeline stared at the talking bear, her mind racing. While the situation was strange, there was something oddly familiar about the bear. It was like she had seen him somewhere before. She racked her brain. She didn't have any stuffed bears at home, so it couldn't be that. And she didn't have many friends, and the friends she did have mostly had dolls. But then suddenly she realized exactly why the bear was familiar. "Wait," she cried, "you're the bear in my father's drawings." The bear smiled and nodded. "Winnie the Pooh," he said, introducing himself. Pooh for short. He pointed at the others. "This is Piglet, Eeyore, and I'm Tigger," the orange and black striped creature said, jumping in and interrupted Pooh. T-I-double-G-R. Madeline couldn't help smiling at the energetic creature. "What's a Tigger?" she asked. The others let out a round of groans as Tigger began to bounce faster and faster around the court. A huge smile spread across his face, and he burst into song. "The wonderful things about Tiggers," he sang, "is Tiggers are wonderful things. Their tops are made out of rubber, their bottoms are made out of springs. They're bouncy, trancy, flouncy, pouncy, fun, 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 fun. But the most wonderful things about Tiggers is I'm the only one." Madeline began clapping, laughing as Tigger finished his song with a flourish. Beside her, Eeyore rolled his eyes. "He does that a lot." "Well, hello," Madeline said, turning and smiling at everyone. Well, it was completely unexplained. Somehow her father's childhood drawings were here and alive, and if Tigger's song was any indication, they seemed like they were quite a lot of fun. "Did the red balloon make you happy?" Pooh asked, taking the hello as a sign of instant friendship. "Balloons make me very happy." "That was from you?" Madeline asked. She glanced over at the red balloon that was now, thanks to a round of Wimbledon, a bit deflated. Pooh shook his head. "No, it was from Christopher Robin." "My father was with you?" Madeline didn't bother to hide her surprise, although it would explain why her father had been slinking out of the woods so early in the morning. "Yes," Pooh answered. "He was helping me find my friends." "And he saved us from the heffalump," Piglet added. Tigger bounced over. "But he left his important papers, which might have been a smidge my fault." "It was your fault," Eeyore replied. In reaction to his deadpan response, Madeline tried to stifle a smile. She could tell already that Eeyore was the grump of the group, but a lovable one. The others were lovable too. Her father's pictures flashed through her mind while she looked at them as they all explained the situation at hand. He had painted these animals in such a clear way, but he hadn't been able to capture them completely. Now that they were there in front of her, Madeline was thrilled. "So we're going on an expedition to London," Piglet went on, mispronouncing the city. Pooh nodded seriously. "If we don't get them to him, a woozle at work is going to eat him for breakfast." Madeline crinkled her nose. Then she realized what, or rather who, Pooh was talking about. "You must mean Winslow." As the others continued to talk about their exposition, Madeline half listened, for she had become distracted. She was beginning to get an idea. If the others were going to London, she was going to go with them. "Christopher Robin said we should go north." Turning back, Madeline saw that the others had started to head toward the gate. She ran to catch up. "London is northwest, actually," she said, joining them, "but the train station is south." Pooh looked down at the compass Christopher had given him. The arrow was pointed toward the N. He frowned. "South? I don't know south." Madeline smiled. "Don't worry," she said, grabbing her bike that was resting along the wall of the house. "I do." Then one by one she plopped the animals into the basket on the bike's front handlebars. They were going on an expedition. But before they left, Madeline made sure to leave a note. After all, she was responsible. Racing into the house, she grabbed a piece of paper, quickly jotted down the following. on an expedition to Father's work. Got his papers, be back soon. Satisfied that would make her mother happy, Madeline taped it to the back door and then raced outside. Now they could really start the expedition. Chapter 13. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for the next chapter. See you next time.